Boom, Matt. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, not a problem.
Dude, excited to be here. Your gym's awesome. We're technically on this is technically west side of Columbus.
Yeah, it's still downtown, but it's on the west side, yeah.
But how long you been here at the gym?
12 years. I started in 2010 here. Let's see. I was originally down at Grove City after that, and then before that I was at Louis' gym for about 3 years.
I gotcha.
So I was pretty much the lineage of me being in Columbus.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to the west side stuff just because the culture there was always intriguing, and then obviously you hear different views from different sides of the story and everything there, and then obviously the Westside Versus the World documentary and all that stuff. But before we get into all that, where in your world are you chasing edges right now? Where are you learning? Where are you growing?
Well, I mean, that's kind of why I bit off the book with Human Kinetics right now, is just kind of really sharpening my education level on all aspects of the conjugate training and just strength training in general. I think a lot of the stuff that I've done, I've learned on myself or with a lot of the people that I've trained. Not to say that my degree with Kramer at Ball State wasn't a huge leap in bounds of where I needed to be at that time, but really putting that information into context and using it with multiple people and then using it with myself to break records, you start really learning the little fine-tuned things that you would never be able to learn in a 4 or 2 year degree. I mean, like I went to graduate school and finished. That would have been a 6-year college degree, and I learned probably 400% more than that the next 10 years just because I was actually applying the information, and that sends you down the rabbit hole of where everything starts to pop. And so now it's just really doing the book just to gain the references. And the hard part now is there's so much information on the internet, but the great books about strength training were all written between, I'd say, late 60s to early 90s, maybe early 2000s, and now they're not in print anymore and you can't find them. And so I was actually looking on eBay or another used book source to find a Mevdiev book that I didn't have, and it was $400
Yikes.
for the book because it's not in print. And it's not on the internet. So I think that is scary because a lot of the really good research I talked about on Bell's podcast 3-4 months ago, we're actually, I think, in some ways 20 years behind where we were 20 years ago because of the founders of smart training are all dead. Verkhoshansky's gone, Poliquin's gone, A.S. Mevdiev's gone. You start looking at all these guys that have just disappeared, and their information is kind of hidden. So I thought when I was coming up through school that in the 90s and the early 2000s that there was just so much more information on proper training, long-term thought process. Now you have more fitness influencers and more YouTube videos, but the context of the information is not nearly as deep.
Yeah, the surface level is definitely there, and obviously people are still training, but that gap of mastery is kind of needs to be filled, which is really cool where you're taking the time and you're obviously writing the book, and then you obviously were involved with like the Westside certifications and all those things where
Sure.
It's almost falling on your shoulders to basically be the Prometheus and keep the fire translated.
Yeah, it's tough because I wish I would have been handed that torch 15 years ago just because there were so many more people that wanted to be educated on how to train smart. Now if somebody doesn't get something in 30 days, they don't want to touch it.
Yeah, and but also like your whole process, I think is dialed. Like some of my favorite humans to talk to, and also my favorite humans to like learn the actual skill set from,
Sure.
have been incredibly educated, and then also like you look the part, are the part, have lived the part, those kind of things where you are this multi-dimensional human and somebody that can, again, take the science but also has lived it and apply it and teach it. Like your ability to storytell and your ability to translate information's elite in that category. And so now, who better to also translate into a Human Kinetics book or even carry on the Westside lineage of the conjugate and those kind of things where it's I think it's awesome that you're one of the guys that are leading the way in that category because you're probably one of the best people to do so.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing about me is I wasn't necessarily just handed genetically high levels of strength. I had my legs broken when I was a kid. I was in full-legged cast for a year. I was homeschooled in first grade. And so I got into weights to actually be able to run and play sports because I couldn't. And so the first thing I gravitated towards when I got out of my cast was swimming because it didn't hurt my legs. And that helped build up my arms and my shoulders and my back. But everything that I developed in my legs, which I would consider myself now, looking back at my lifting career with, the 520 for 24 on squats and the multiple equipped world records and raw world records, I would consider myself a better squatter than any of the other 3 lifts. Although I would say the bench came easier to me because I was a good swimmer. The legs I had to work everything for. I had to learn every little tiny trick of the trade, technical wise, training wise, everything to be able to do those numbers and not damage myself, and that's really where the knowledge came. So I think a lot of people that have it maybe worse off in the beginning tend to know more because they have to.
Yeah, out of requirement almost, and like that's just. But I didn't even know that step of your story where that's really cool. Where I think another separator in like the whole powerlifting, particularly when you get into like the elite levels of like world records and things like that, where like it is like passion, discipline, consistency. All those things are bare minimum requirement, obviously, to make that separation between great humans and elite humans in that category. When I usually love the conversation in football and other things like that, but I also think people sleep on the powerlifting, even the bodybuilding world, as far as like this sport of elite levels of discipline, massive chunks of time of life that take to make these very small incremental gains. And that's where like that whole world and that whole mindset is cool. But I also think, and as much as I hate it, the more I've found that like between like the ages of 0 and 6, 6 and 15, and even like your early jobs and like the grit of your life and what you all you went through defines that separation ability too, where I've found it in a bunch of high performers I've had on the podcast too, where they eventually they become passionate about it, but they were scratching their own itch or solving their own problem early. And that's obviously what you were doing. And then to see like the lats and the shoulders and stuff translate to bench from swimming and those kind of things. And obviously the mastery it takes to be able to like come back from all the leg breaks and like find every muscle, activate it, learn it, train it, and eventually create this monster from what, again, could have been in a different mindset, a crippled human for the rest of their life, or a very weak, soft human. And one of the things I wanted to talk to on the pod is the mindset. And obviously you've kind of started to scratch into that, where now as you're solving your problem, like what age did you like officially like do your first competition and all those things?
So I did my first bench press competition at 13.
All right.
I started lifting when I was 11 because I knew at 12 and 13 was going to be the first year we could use pads in football. And because I had avoided so many sports that involve legs, I actually was in the grocery store with my mom, and I had picked up a Muscle and Fitness or a Flex magazine, and I can't remember the person, but I saw a pro NFL player that was talking about strength training to play football. And I was like, well, shit, I don't like running, but I love lifting, or I think I would like lifting, and maybe that wouldn't hurt. So I went, it was about a mile bike ride from my house to this local YMCA. And so my mom goes, well, ride there and I'll give you the money for like day passes and I'll sign off, because I was a minor, and see if you like it. And if you like it, I'll get you a membership. And it just so happened, and that's a whole nother story in of itself, but it just so happened that I go in and there are 2 national caliber at their own eras lifters that were from that area. One of them was Timmy Smith that bench pressed 500 at 181 body weight. And another one was Jim Dawson, which was deadlifted 722 in 1970 at 242, and nobody had pulled 800 yet. So he was one of the best deadlifters, not only in the Midwest, but in the country at that time. And, Tim Smith was one of the best pound for pound body weight benchers in the early 80s. And so they see me and they think I'm in high school, but actually I'm in 6th grade. And so at first they're kind of testing me to see if I have the work, ethic. And Timmy sees I'm a big kid and I'm really interested in bench pressing and doing powerlifting. And he goes, well, can you do a pull-up? And I look up and I'm like, but I was close. I could maybe do a half a pull-up. Because keep in mind, I'm in 6th grade. I was like 165 pounds.
Yeah.
So I was a big kid. And he goes, well, when you can do a pull-up, you can lift with us. And so he gave me a goal to see. I don't think he realized what he was doing, but what he was doing was showing me that I had to work my weaknesses before I could do the things I wanted to do. And so I practiced and worked on all kinds of things I could find at the time, which there was no internet, on how to get my pull-ups to come up. And I ended up running into articles from Poliquin on eccentrics. And so I read that and practiced them. And about 6 weeks later, I could do a pull-up. And Tim Smith was like, well, fuck it, you could do a pull-up. Now you can bench with us. And so that's what started that. And then so I do my first bench press meet at 13. I do my first full contest at 14. And then by the time I'm 19, I'm world champion.
Yeah.
But, think about it, like 11 to 19, that was already 8 years of training to get to that point. And then I turned 20, and I was one of the youngest guys. Well, I benched 500 when I was 19, but I squatted 700 when I was 20. So I became a junior, and I squatted 700. And then by the time I left college, I had almost all the American records, and then I was already capable of turning pro with my total by the time I was ready to be in the open.
Let's go.
Which was awesome, because then there was a little bit of a stagnation point, because Dr. Newton and Dr. Kramer and Dr. Volek were pushing me into getting a master's. They're like, dude, you have so much hands-on information, but he goes, I know that your skills in the computer range is not as high as some of these guys that we want to put in for clinical bio, but you're going to help these kids that you're in school with do applicable research, because they want to do all this stuff that nobody's going to read.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, we need to do studies on this, because this is what we need to prove, because this is what we're doing in the weight room. And so that I was kind of the applied guy around all the nerds.
Yeah, but it's a great balance.
Oh, it was huge. I mean, my biomechanics lab partner was a mathematics graduate from MIT.
Yeah, it's savage.
And I'm a fucking meathead. Like, so she did all the hard math shit, and I'm trying to show her how to use this for anything applicable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was a really good mixture, and they were really smart at doing that, because they would usually have 4 or 5 guys that were super nerds in the math and science, and then one applied guy that's like, we got to quit studying this. This isn't going to do anything.
Yeah.
And so that kind of stunted my ability to go higher pro faster. So by 2004, I squat 900, but then 2005, I'm finishing my last year at Masters at one of the prestigious schools in the country. So there was no slacking. I mean, the papers were literally, like highest level that we had to turn in. And so by the time I graduated in 2005, I just moved straight to Columbus to train with Louis, so I could just get that time period of knowledge and strength while I was still young enough to apply that level to make it as far as I could, because I knew if I just kind of pushed it off too long, that there was just a certain time in which if you want to be the best in the world, you have this time block that you just can't play with. I mean, you could say, hey, I want to be really strong at 40. That's awesome. You can be strong, but breaking an all-time world record in the open class, it's going to be really hard.
Yeah.
So I put my strength training in front of my career for about, I'd say almost 10 or 11 years at that point. So I turned 25, finished with my master's, and then it's all trying to be as good as I can be physically, because I'm like, I can make money later, but I only got this time to do this, Yeah,
I mean, it's the same mindset of like an NFL athlete, anybody, and that's a high performer. Like, your body has a ticking time clock on it, but it's also what's really cool that your career illustrates as well is a lot of the problems I see, not problems, but like humans I see now, like they want the changes in 6 weeks, 6 months, even like a year. They want this strong X, and like your foundation of 8 years before you even turn 19, like that whole gap, people don't respect time as this mastery variable. And I get it when I coach breath work and stuff, like I'll give people the fundamentals in a couple touches, and like next time I see them, give me something new, give me something that's going to change this. And it's just, no, I understand you have no respect of mastery at this point. And so obviously you've mastered the physical side of it, and then you even, again, with the ticking time clock, mastered the mental side of it. And I think that obviously makes you interesting human as well, just because I always like the analogy that, like, you don't go to the circus to see a bear, you don't go to the circus to see a unicycle, you go to see a bear ride a unicycle. And like, in essence, like, you're probably the closest thing to a bear I've had on the fucking podcast, but yeah. But in that realm, like that interest of mastery on both ends of the spectrum shows up, and then now you have this foundation of discipline that brings you to Louis, and 2004 that was.
Yeah, so 2005. So, but I was already going to Louis by 99. I just was still living at home in Indiana, going to school. And good thing I didn't listen to him, because he was like, by the time I finished my undergrad, he's like, you don't need a master's degree. Just come over here and train. That would have been a bad idea.
Get a master's in iron, yeah.
Yeah, so I ended up staying in school and finishing all that out. But I finally moved full-time to Louis at 05, but I had been driving down over there 2 to 3 times a month since 1999.
That's awesome.
And then occasionally I would drive up to Chicago and train with Ed Cohen, because it was about the same distance.
Oh, damn.
It was 2.5 hours to Ed Cohen or 2.5 hours to Louis, So
what a couple of monsters to learn from, too.
Yeah, it was crazy. They're completely different knowledge bases. Ed Cohen had a very linear ideal of how to get better, and a lot of that came from his perfect physical traits. He's short, he's thick. I mean, he's basically a 300-pound man in a 220-pound body.
Yeah.
He's got humongous hands. He can palm a basketball, and he's, only 5'6" tops.
Yeah.
So he had all these weird traits that I think allowed him to train a little bit more specific for longer and get really good at doing that, just because his body had the leverages to do so. Versus at Louis' place, the first thing I noticed was that everybody was built different, but they all looked the same when they lifted. And I thought, this is interesting, because, Chuck's 5'9", maybe 10. Jerry Obradovich was like 6'1". Dave Tate was like well over 6 foot. Yeah. But Kenny Patterson was like 5'6", maybe. So all these guys were all these different. Tim Harold was like 6'7". So we had all these dudes at all different styles, but when they would come in to train, their technique was insanely similar. And I thought, well, that's odd, because that doesn't go along the lines of what some of these books are saying, which is, you want to squat how you're anthropometrically built. And what I started realizing was Louis was teaching people how to squat this certain way, regardless of how they were built. And they were all breaking world records. And I thought, that's interesting. And I didn't really say, well, all these books are wrong and Louis is 100% right. But I thought it was interesting because, usually people say, well, just do how you're built. And Louis would reteach all of that until it was how he thought it was the right way. And so I saw guys that didn't have the structure to squat big weights in a normal sense be able to do insane numbers because their technique was so flawless. And so that's when I started realizing that technical mastery was so important, even beyond just being strong, is learning to really utilize the lift as a technical proficiency. And that's where it gets difficult, because you don't want to use, I just did a video, you probably saw it on Instagram and YouTube, and everybody that wasn't real smart about training couldn't understand what I was saying. But what I was talking about was, you don't use squats for hypertrophy. And the reason is because it's a technical lift. So if you're training the squats to get super strong or super fast, that's smart. If you're training it to fatigue 100% and your technique is not 100% perfect, you are setting yourself up for massive disaster. The problem with utilizing guys like myself and Tom Platz, we've both squatted, say, over 500 pounds for over 20 reps, which only a handful of people that's ever lived have been able to do. If you watch him do it and me do it, our technique never changes. It stays exactly the same. Now, whether you believe in Platz's Olympic style or my powerlifting style, that's off the table. But the point is, that style that we selected stayed exactly the same from rep 1 to rep 24, and for Platz 23. Most people, by the time they get to a fatigue point, their knees are going to buck in, they're going to start rounding over, their weaknesses are going to start addressing themselves. So you have to have many, many years of heavy training and technical proficiency under your belt to even consider using compound movements for hypertrophy without having danger of injury. But most people just don't make it that long, that far, so they don't really understand what I was trying to get at with that particular topic.
No, I like that a lot. I did see that, because I learned that really briefly, because I would say I spent whatever 15 years in the football world doing like football caliber strength training, and you see it all the time, and like you see that as like the dog points where like, okay, you got to fight through these X amount of reps. And then I did about a year of powerlifting out with Corey and the guys out at Old School. And I learned really quickly under those heavy weights and the bands and all the different variants and conjugate that I was not proficient in squat, not even fucking close. And it took me a year just to get comfortable under the bar with the brace, with the angles. Like then eventually I did one competition, and like that was enough of a picture to show that what you said for me like rang incredibly true, because I've watched so many guys form buckle for these blue collar reps that are separators, especially in college. Oh my gosh, it's atrocious. And then pro football, they still try and protect the guys a little. Like we're not even training crazy hard, but like we'll still get into that, even like the 6 to 12 rep range, and guys break down because they don't even do that outside of that.
Which is sad, because, you know, you start noticing how much, and not busting balls, but how little the pro and college level strength coaches really know, because in reality, in my personal opinion, doing a heavy set of 10 is way more dangerous than doing singles.
And I like, from what I've learned, I've felt that I feel where like we're obviously doing a heavy rep every week or working to these heavy max fails, and I felt so much better after. Like I never had, God willing, like didn't have any back pain or anything like that, but when I was playing and we're hitting, like, I mean, at one point we did German volume training in my college program, 10 sets of 10, same structured rest periods, all those things, and I would just be blown out, and I know my form was fucked at that point. Like, so it's just like, but even in like the 5 sets of 5 or 5 sets of 10, like I know like how bad I've felt after those sets, but like went through a year of this at 32 years old, 33 years old, and was completely fine. So like that, just in my own little guinea pig experiment, it makes logical sense.
It's just technique, you know, and that's the thing, is nobody wants to take 10 years to make their technique absolutely perfect, when we both know that technique is all based on weaknesses. So if you don't have hamstrings and are not strong, you're going to squat like you don't have hamstrings, because the body goes to what it has.
Yeah.
That's the problem with technical proficiency and or breakdown, is that it's a slow process of the body. Let's say you're doing a set of 10 and it's heavy as shit. By set 6 or rep 6, your body's going to whatever it knows. Well, if you're perfect, it just goes to the same motor pattern every time, which most people don't have.
No.
And that's what I was trying to get at with that particular saying, but we made it a little controversial to draw in some.
Yeah, great art divides the audience. Like great information should divide the audience, or at least, or you're testing the paradigm that truly exists, and breaking somebody's framework like takes, again, the right person with the right experience, the right story, and that essence to like break that barrier. But like also, like I look at the athletic world, and like I think athletes are some of the most elite compensatory pattern holders, where like they are really good at working around their weaknesses, particularly in like a squat, or like barely anybody deadlifts. If they deadlift, it's trap bar, you know, it's like all that kind of concept. But as you start to break the paradigm, like those stories and those points, like I think more and more people are at least starting to listen to them, because people like you are translating.
Yeah, the problem is that you just have to have a long-term mindset. I mean, case in point, the first time I meet Ed Cohen, I'm 20 years old, and I'm doing a meet not very far from where he grew up, or where he was at, which was in Chicago. This meet was about an hour inside of Indiana, so it was only about an hour drive for him, roughly. And he happened to be there. I didn't know he was going to be there. And I squat my first 700, and I'm only 20. And he comes up to me and he goes, "Man, you're a hell of a gifted squatter. You can tell you've put a lot of years into your technique." He goes, "You know, if you can hold on another 8 or 10 years and not get hurt, you're going to squat well over 800. So think about that for a second. I make it to 7, and he's telling me it's going to take 8 more years to reach 8.
And like, to the normal human, like that's like a drop point, or like so intimidating at that point. But like that, I think that's one of the coolest messages I've ever heard. Yeah.
So for me, it was just like great, because I love training.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I never had a timeline, and that was my biggest, other than my studying and my immense, like almost insanity to be able to make my lifestyle the way I wanted it to be strong, was the fact that I had no impatience. And I don't know how I got that. Maybe it's because I started off with my legs broken and I knew it was just going to be a long road anyway. But the first few meets that I went to when I was a kid, there were always other kids stronger than me because they weren't hurt. And I said, well, okay, well, I'll outlast them. And so I just kept outlasting. And it's funny because from 1993 to 2018, which was pretty much my last meet, the end of 17, I went through almost 5 generations of lifters. Guys I would see at national and world meets, and then in 2 or 3 years, they're gone. And then the next 2 or 3 years, those guys are gone. And the next 2, 3 years, those guys are gone. And you start looking at how they train, and you realize it's their timeline, and they're pushing too fast, and they're building all of their strength on anabolic substances versus training smart and doing it with a good lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that's when I started realizing, like, okay, I can just keep outlasting every generation up to the point that, the time got to me, but, as far as age, but that, I mean, it was crazy. I remember all the best champions in the world in the mid 90s were completely gone by the early 2000s, 5, 6 years.
Yeah.
And I just kept outlasting and no injuries. And then as I kept doing that, my body kept getting a little stronger and a little stronger. And then by the time 2006 was around, I was top 5 in the world. And by the time 2008 came around, I broke my first all-time world record in the total with, I think, the 6th highest squat ever done in human history. And then the next year I break that again. And then I'm one of the first guys to squat 11, pull 8, and bench 8 in the same meet. And then 2011, I go higher in the squat than any Westside Barbell guy ever had, which was 1197.6.
Yeah.
But I did it right at, or maybe a hair under 300 pounds. I was still in the 308 class, but I wasn't a super heavy. So that was a really big milestone for me, because 2008 and 9 was the first meets I did that I wasn't around Louis. So it was all on me. The training, laying out the training, designing how I was going to peak and taper. So I had to put everything I had learned in the last 20 years and make it perfect, because not only am I trying to do better without my old coach, I'm trying to do better without my old coach at his meet. So I'm showing back up at his contest, which you can see in Westside Versus the World, and I win.
Yeah.
And it was so bad at that point that Louis didn't talk to me for probably 5 years after that, because I was the first guy that had left and got better. Because, and the only thing I really did, I'm not hiding anything. The only thing I really did was I understand how to recover better. So Louis would go in and train this Bulgarian grinder situation. Well, I started reading more into the books that he had and I had, and I started realizing that the Bulgarians, when they max, they're maxing on speed lifts. They're maxing on the clean and jerk and the snatch. Now, regardless if that's heavy or a PR or not, it's still fast. But a back squat or a deadlift is a grind. It's maximum. It's almost isometric. It's way more muscle damage.
Yeah.
Although the lift is more simple in technique, it's much more hard on the muscle tissue, because you're looking at 6 or 7 seconds of just right near maximum tension. Whereas in reality, Olympic lifting, there's never really a point of maximal tension. It's all dynamics. So I started looking into that and going, we need more rest than the Olympic books say, because we're training at a higher intensity. 95% of a max back squat is not the same as 95% snatch.
Yeah. Guaranteed.
Now, there's other things that are hard about those Olympic lifts, but as far as bar speed is concerned, they're very different. So, the max effort snatch still needs to be fast to be done.
Yeah.
You can't grind a snatch. You either get it or you don't.
Yeah.
Whereas a deadlift, if you want to stick with it long enough, you probably can get it, right?
Yeah.
But you don't see 8-second snatches.
No, not even close.
Right?
Yeah.
So I started building in more rest periods, and I started digging more into Mevdiev's books and some of the other people from Russia. And I started realizing that regardless, even with Olympic lifting, they were taking every 4th week, they were dropping the intensity or the volume in order to let the body supercompensate to build the new block. And so at Louis' place, we never did deloads. And so when I built in the deloads, it was like my strength just went another 15% in like 8 months.
That's savage.
Because I was recovering. So that's when I started realizing it's not what you can do, it's what you can recover from. Right?
That's such a clean, simple way to say it. Just because so many people, like even like the generics now, or like even the CrossFit world, those kind of things. A lot of people want to train like pros or train really hard, but nobody wants to recover really hard.
Well, what they don't get is like the guys that are at pros, and I'll take CrossFit for example, they're not training WODs like the average dude in the gym. They're training their weaknesses most of the time. And most of the time, they already have an immense athletic background. If I recall, most of the best CrossFitters are ex-Division I wrestlers.
Yeah.
And the reason is because they're used to 3.5-hour practices. They've been doing that since they're 4 years old. And a wrestling practice at very high intensity is way harder than doing a CrossFit workout. So,
and then they usually are like on the shorter side that are built for some of the lifts.
They have the anthropometrics. I mean, you run into Froning and a lot of them other guys. I'm not downplaying what they do. I think it's impressive as shit. I love watching it. but they're not built like average people.
Yeah.
You're not going to take a 6-foot guy that's 220 and say, I want to be the best in the world at CrossFit. I mean,
Yeah.
and then you're going to start at 22 years old and think that's going to happen. Like, it's too late, dude. Like, you already should have been a great wrestler 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's a good look at the whole history of the movement patterns and everything.
And the big thing is CrossFit has one thing right. And because I don't like busting its balls all the time, because I think it brought, in some ways, some very good publicity to working out again in the late 2000s and now. But the problem is that it's rotating with no education. So that's another major issue. So when you're doing these WODs, you might be training different ways all the time, but it's not necessarily for your weak points or motor patterns that you need to be practicing for yourself. And you can bet your ass the pros are doing that. They're finding where their weaknesses are, and they're building their WODs based on those particular areas. But the average CrossFit coach in an average gym, and again, not busting their balls, but how do you become a CrossFit certified coach in 2 days and now you know how to train people?
Yeah.
Because I've been doing this for 30 years now, and I feel like I know 75% of what I need to know.
Yeah, which is,
I mean, I still have 25 more percent. And why I say that is mostly because of this book. Every time I open up another Zatsiorsky Biomechanics book or a Comey's book or a Mevdiev's book, I walk away almost punched in the gut because I'm like, I don't know near as much as I fucking think I do.
Yeah, and that's such a cool amount of friction, though. Like, same as you're grinding through all your reps in the gym, like the new information, intimidates a lot of humans that I've come across where it's like, oh, I'll never learn it all. And so, I'll become fluent at level 1 CrossFit coach.
Yep.
So I actually had to become level 1 CrossFit coach because I own part of a CrossFit gym just as a business venture. And what I learned there, I don't think I could even coach majority of the movements. Even with my history in football, I don't think I could coach an accurate squat.
Well, which is sad because I think CrossFit in its original thought process probably wasn't a bad idea, but like everything else, it started to get de-trained and de-educated as they started to see the money pile up.
Yeah.
They started to go, well, yeah, we can make this really smart and really educated, but then it's so complex that the average person can't do it, and now we can't make any money. So let's just
scale.
We're going to scale it and make as much as we can. And again, I'm not busting their balls, but you start looking at that as a model to do something. It's sketchy because, I see all kinds of people that go to try it, and the injury rates are so insane because, again, we're going back to why I said you don't use squats as a hypertrophy exercise. You can't use power cleans and snatches and plyometrics for endurance.
Yeah.
They're not designed for that. They're not meant for that. And anybody that knows anything, has read anything on Verkhoshansky that designed plyometrics back in the 50s, would realize that the sets are high and the reps are low to maintain technical proficiency. So why in the hell are you doing snatches for a minute?
Yeah, illogical.
You're asking to get fucked up. And that's the problem is people just don't look at it that way. They're just they're getting sold the sexy stuff. They think because it looks neat that they want to try it. And I'm all for it, but you have to be really thoughtful on, you don't hand a 15-year-old kid 1,000 horsepower, Hellcat motor car. They're going to die.
Yeah.
Same thing as you don't give somebody that's not that athletic Olympic lifts and think that that's going to fix the problem. It's going to enhance the problem.
Yeah, I talk about a lot on the podcast, not to train strength on dysfunction. And then Dr. Serrano and a bunch of good trainers have all identified one of the biggest points in finding a coach is find a coach that trains your weaknesses. He can identify and assess them, and he trains those and prioritizes that first. And that makes so much sense.
It's amazing. But the problem is the average person doesn't want to buy into that. So now you're in a conundrum. Let's say, for instance, like you, for example, you have a gym, and now you go to everything that's the smartest you can go to, and now nobody wants to come and see you.
Yeah.
Because you're doing a long-term thought process. You're fixing their weaknesses. But in reality, the average person is looking at that as a negative. They're going, well, I can't do all this cool stuff first, and now you're going to make me take 10 steps back so I can take 20 steps in 2 years?
Yeah.
But they don't look at that right now. They're like, well, you're not going to fix me in 30 days. I'm out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem.
And it's a problem. Yeah, and it's a partially ego thing, obviously, but it's also misunderstanding of what true, again, mastery or like a foundation is. And again, your foundation was built on 20 years, like that kind of concept. And you got told after that you need 8 more years to even become this level of fluent. And I think that just to not be intimidated and move through that, because I do want to talk about the mindset in the powerlifting world, because obviously you've been the most elite at it in that realm, and also like the culture of the Westside influence on that.
Sure.
But how has your mindset grown from what we can start off on kind of that like 8-year point from Ed Cohn's advice to the world records?
Well, at first I proved Ed Cohen wrong because I squatted 1,003 in 06. So it only took me 6 years to reach 1,000 versus 10 years to reach 800. But so that was cool, but it was because I was training insanely smart and intensively. But the focus on that is, really learning to block out outside stressors, because training, most people look at training as, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to burn off some bad energy, I'm going to burn off some stress. When you train like a professional lifter, the training is the stress. I mean, it's funny because even now, after doing max effort work on Saturdays for the last 20 plus years, I still go into the gym with anxiety now.
But which is a cool level of friction though, yeah.
Yeah, but it makes me, and then once I start doing my warm-ups, all that's gone. But when I still drive to the gym, I still get that feeling of like the first time I went to Louie's place, or the first time I went to Ed Cohen's place, or the first time I walked into the Y. But I use that energy in a positive sense, where I think most people would use that energy to walk away. They'd be like, I'm too nervous, I'm too scared. I don't want to do this because I'm anxious, or this brings me stress. I ran right into the fucking stress.
Yeah,
it was
right
like, bring it, motherfucker. Yeah. This ain't like getting like hit by a car at 50 miles an hour. I'll survive. And sometimes I didn't know if I'd survive when I was at Louie's place, especially when I was a kid. But that's the thing is, like, for me, I get anxiety just like anybody else does. I just don't listen to it. I actually use it as fuel. I'm like, wait a minute. If I'm driving to the gym and I'm feeling anxious, like I don't want to go because I don't want to put myself through this, that means that I'm being average. Because the average person would say, I'm going to go get a donut.
Yeah.
I'm going to be like, no, fuck that. I'm not average. I'm walking into the gym. And, the nice thing about having a group of the guys that I train with and my clients, I am their role model. If I'm not willing to come in and bust my ass and do it, why do I expect them to do it? That's the biggest problem with pro strength coaches, college strength coaches, high school strength coaches. I'm going to keep going and going, but personal trainers, you want to give and you want to read all this information to your clients, but you don't want to do it yourself. Like, that to me is the ultimate sign that you're full of shit.
Dude, I don't hate that, but I hate that just because like I've ran into the same problem. But like that makes logical sense. But also like just being like a awesome, deep, meaningful human in general, and like giving back is one of like my concepts in general that I talk about on the podcast as well. But picking up that level of responsibility of being the example in a group and like actually the standard holder and like the gatekeeper of a culture, dude, I think that just elevates you even more. So like people shy away from holding responsibility because again they could back out of that drive on Saturday.
Well, it's case in point. I mean, there's probably roughly 3 million people in Columbus, right? I have 30 clients that come 4 times a week. 30. That's it.
Yeah.
And a handful of them come in and out. And it's not because my schedule is off or wonky or whatever. My point is that's how many people are actually dedicated. So what is that, 0.0001%?
Yeah.
So if people think they're going to open up a performance center and train people really smart and do it perfect, I commend you and I want you to do that, but you better have a side hustle because you're going to find out how much the general population doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah, and that's
right?
It's funny too. I had a couple other gym owners on here where they also anticipate that the person that they think would be their first client is actually their last client. And that concept, I thought it was just cool to think about who you really think is the dedicated, or who you think is a friend, or who you think trains hard would be interested, and then ends up being like a whole.
Well, think about it in this perspective. I trained 4 local fire departments, okay? Each of them have roughly 100 guys, so we're talking about 400 dudes. You know how many of them come into the gym and train with me on their off days?
2.
2.
Oh, let's go.
2.
Yeah.
Sometimes 4.
Yeah.
So 4 out of 400 come on their off days, it shows you their importance level to it, really.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, so, and it's not that they don't do what I tell them to do when I'm there, but it's because they don't have a choice. Now you have a choice, and now you don't want to do it.
Yeah, and I think I think that's what makes life really interesting. And when guys transition from high, like, elite performance, same at, like, powerlifting, military fight, like, whatever, like, football, like, the fact that you get to choose who you're around, the lifestyle, I try and get people excited about that. But, like, that's such a separator, like, where you spend that chosen amount of time, and where, like, what, like, the firefighter thing intrigues me because their world is life and death.
Yeah, but they don't look at it that way, because here's the thing, is like, to us, it's life and death, and to them, it really is life and death. But to them, for a lot of them, they come in and they don't take hard runs every day. So they start to get slowly and more complacent on the fact that they're just there in reserve.
Yeah.
Then when a real fire happens, you get all these problems, and fire department stuff's so hard on you, because look at how many guys die in the line of action, and blah, 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 and all this.
Attacks, yeah.
You're dying in the line of action because you're lazy, and then you hop up and go to 180 beats per minute. Your body's not used to it.
Yeah, and heart attacks is one of the biggest.
That'd be like me saying, you know, well, I mean, powerlifting is dangerous. Yeah, it's dangerous if you take 400 on the bench, you've never benched before, and you try to bench it.
Yeah.
But if you build up to it over 10 years, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's the problem is, again, it's the timeline. And
it's that drift. I talk about on here a lot, the drift to failure concept, where, like, you fall short of the standard one day, it gets really easy to hit that and miss that and again, and then just that slow drift into complacency, and then just kind of steer it. The one I didn't want to skip over it, because how you attack that anxiety is special, and I think a lot of people can learn lessons from that, because I speak on it physiologically, because a lot of that anxiety and stuff is really your body starting to switch into this sympathetic state, like the butterflies, your stomach shutting down, your mouth gets dry, tight butthole, whatever, all these things. It's physiology, and when I present and storytell to get the point across, like, I tell people to be a dog. Like, literally, like, we need to be fucking dogs again. And, like, guys like the term dog, to say dog, really.
And that's another big issue that you're talking about, because really that mindset, that drive, society's trying to reduce at every stage. I mean, what did James Cameron, the director, they just started talking about how testosterone should be completely
that
gone.
Fucking pussy, yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But how many people listen to him because he's James Cameron?
Yeah, who knows?
Number one. Number two, why is Arnold standing beside him and being any part of that conversation at all?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, Arnold and James Cameron are like really good friends. Let me tell you how crazy this is. I'm at Gold's Gym training with Mike O'Hearn, and he trains really early. So we're working out and dicking around and shooting videos and whatever. And Arnold walks in, and he's got this crony, a crew guys, like 5 dudes, right? And Arnold knows my face. So he's like, "Hi, how are you? You know, you train the Rangers, you know what I mean?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's me, man." And he's like, "You know, you train with Mike today?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "What are you doing?" He goes, "You know, I'm just doing some arms because I'm just old now." And I was like, "Well, can I stick around and do some arms with you?" And he's like, "I don't care." So we're walking around doing arms. We get a couple pictures together. And he's got these 6 or 8 cronies, and these dudes don't even look like they lift weights. I'm thinking, who the fuck are these guys, right? And I'm thinking, like, he's going to walk in with, like, you know,
dogs, yeah.
Dogs, right? And so I don't ask him who they are, and I don't care. Then Frank Stallone, Sylvester's brother, walks in, and I'm talking to him a little bit, and they all leave, and I go home and take a nap, and then Mike comes back to train around 2 o'clock. So this is all really early in the morning. So I go home, take a nap, get something to eat, come back and train with Mike again. I'm like, "Mike, who are all these fucking douchebags that are hanging around Arnold, walking into the gym with them and, like, just dicking around?" He goes, "Well, the one douchebag's James Cameron, so he directed all the fucking Terminators." I'm like, "Okay, I'm an asshole." The other guy invented Siri.
Oh God.
And I'm like, "Oh, he's around a different kind of dogs."
Yeah.
So he realizes those dudes will push him to a higher level, and he's already done everything he can do with the lifting crowd.
Yeah, which is like, and you got to respect that and that kind of thing. But a lot of humans with the anxiety point, like, they shy away from running into the storm or attacking that. When you look at a dog, when a dog gets anxious and, like, crazy,
it bites.
Yeah, it bites. But what do you do with a dog to get it? You go run the fucking dog. You go work the fucking dog, and the dog will tell you when it's tired. It'll start panting, and then what does the dog do? It goes home and it goes to sleep. And, like, it's same as, like, all these short and long-term emotions. I talk about it with Brian McKenzie on the previous podcast, but, like, anger, frustration, emotion, all these things are long-term emotions. Eckhart Tolle quote is like a healthy organism like lives in like short-term emotions. And so like the dog gets in a fight, it doesn't bring the fight home and talk about it and think about it. No, it goes, eats its food, and it goes to fucking sleep.
Yeah.
And like that's like, but the ability to understand yourself as a dog, I'm anxious, I gotta go to work. I don't gotta avoid my fucking problems and get my dopamine from a donut or a TV show, and like, or else this is just gonna be, you're gonna be spinning your wheels, and you're gonna see the anxiety show up in the world like it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think not getting too political about it, but I think it's in some ways it's the higher powers trying to figure out how they can control the society. And again, if you got all fucking dogs that aren't going to put up with your shit, I mean, case in point, look at where we're at right now with politics.
Yeah.
How in the fuck did Biden and any of these guys get into office?
Yeah.
Like, the dude can't even fucking talk. And at the entire time he was in the Senate or wherever for 40 years, he didn't do shit.
Yeah.
And then we end up somehow getting them in. I'm not saying, and I'm not really a Trump supporter either.
Yeah.
Because I think he's an asshole too, other than he's got some positive points as well. But you look at like Biden's track record, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? But the point is, if everybody's stupid, nobody's a fighter.
Low T, yeah.
And nobody's low T, and nobody's smart. Nobody asks any fucking questions.
Yeah, sheep.
You know, yeah, that's what they want. They want millions and millions of sheep to just pay taxes and shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And that's what they're developing. And it's sad because kids are firing on this dopamine with Instagram, TikTok. They want to see these little short reels. I mean, I'll give you an example. If right now I posted something completely stupid on my page that had nothing to do with any type of education, it'll get 10 times the clicks than showing somebody a new exercise and how they do it and to make them better.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear it.
The algorithms are against the boys. Yeah.
Yeah. What's funny is
against the dogs. Yeah.
some people have said this is true and false. I got this information from the minister of China. So I had an intern here named Ying, and Ying's uncle was the minister of China for education. You know what they do over there for their YouTube? They promote at certain age groups, like when you go, let's say you're 10 years old and you're looking up stuff on YouTube, science experiments, math equations, like all of this stuff that's like education smart.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying they don't have stupid shit too, but their algorithms are more set up to advance the population, whereas over here we're trying to make ourselves fucking idiots.
What a cool look at the algorithm. I think that's dynamite.
Yeah, and like I said, I only heard that from the top. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
Because it might have just been them making them country look better, but you can sure as hell see it.
Yeah. I mean,
You know, and I'll give you an example. Ying was telling me when he was over here that 25, 30 years ago, when his uncles were over in the United States for schooling, they tried everything they could to stay in America because it was better. Now the Chinese come over here and learn, and then we get the fuck out of here.
yeah.
Think about that. That's something to say really big time. You know what I mean? Like, you're leaving this country to go to another country when we're supposed to be the best in the world.
Yeah, and that's again, like, but you see, like, even people that make the products, like they'll, everyone wants to go and outsource their products 'cause it's cheaper, but like the Chinese end up just stealing the product, making it cheaper, and selling it back to us. It's the similar concept, but like that is a cool turn of events where, again, like
something to look into. I know a famous guy posted the same thing on Instagram. I saw a short on that, and they were talking about how they're trying to advance the education of the younger kids in China with our advanced media. But now, I mean, they're advanced media.
Yeah.
But what are we doing over here?
We're
We had everybody addicted to vape pens and
zombies.
watching shorts.
We got zombies.
You know, so that's it's scary. I don't, like I said, I mean, some of that's a little out there, but it's
a real thing
real
that's
thing
happening.
yeah.
And then just to steer the conversations, because I know you're ticking on time. As far as like we talked about a little bit before the podcast, but addressing athletes and conjugate method and how they're starting to adopt it. Can you break down the conjugate method a little bit real quick? And then
well, so linear periodization usually trades off something else for something else. So if I'm working on 10s and 8s, I'm in, let's say, a hypertrophy block, and then I go down to working in 2s and 3s and 5s, I might be in like a strength block.
Yeah.
So you're trading off blocks. Conjugate was, from my readings, an experimental project that was brought forth called the piecemeal system that was brought forth by A.S. Medvedev, which was not only a world champion, but also studied and helped Alexiev with his training, which broke 75 world records in Olympic lifting. After the 1972 Olympics, they allowed Alexiev to train however he wanted. Because he just had some other ideas. He's like, well, we've already got 50 world records out of him if he wants to do something else. But he also wanted 50 elite guys to go with him. And so they let him. And so Medvedev went with him, and they developed this piecemeal system. It was 100 exercises because these guys were already high sport mastery. So they were like, we can't just keep running the same exercises into the ground. We're just getting burned out.
Yeah.
And we're also getting overuse injuries. So they started developing this piecemeal system, and it started off with 24, then 40 something, then 60, and then up to 100 exercises before the communist system fell apart. And what it was an ability to train multiple disciplines, i.e. getting stronger, getting faster, and getting more cross-sectional muscle area or endurance, and training them both in a linear fashion to where you're not trading off one for the other. That's really what conjugate's about. It's about being able to attack where you're weak, but keep everything else in maintenance blocks so you don't lose anything. Whereas traditional periodization trades one for the other.
Yeah.
And then you're always building yourself back because you've maybe got some more muscle mass, but now you've transferred that to strength. Now you got to go back to muscle mass because you've lost some.
Yeah.
So how can you build it all up together? Well, that takes a lot of smarts because you can overtrain in an instant if you're not only focusing on one area.
Yeah.
And so that's really what the conjugate system is. It's a delicate mixture of maximal effort method, dynamic effort method, and repetition method. Now, however you train, your system is falling along the lines of one of those three methods at all times.
Yeah.
So that's the pie, and there's 33% dedicated to each one of those particular areas. So conjugate equally trains getting quicker, getting stronger, and getting more cross-sectional muscle area, pretty much in a nutshell.
Nice. And how do you think that applies to sports now? Because
Well,
some coaches are starting to adopt their variant of conjugate method. Yeah.
Well, it's funny the variants that I see pop up because you can see the lack of education and experience. But in reality, the first major components are what are your needs now. The second thing is the timeline. Conjugate only really works super well two ways. One, if your timeline is insanely long. Two, if you're already a genetic freak. So if you're already a badass, you put in conjugate, you're going to get better because your psychological burnout and your stress level is going to stay lower because you're varying exercises. But the problem is you got to have the right exercises at the right time with the right stimulus and the right rest periods in order for all that to work correctly. So a lot of people just go, nah, that system's too complex. I'm going to use just something simple. But like we talked about before we were on the podcast, understanding biomechanics, endocrinology, muscle fiber typing, personality typing, all of these things, that is what makes training complex. Conjugate system does a better job of trying to match all those areas as good as it can, but it also takes an experienced hand to wield that sword. And so there's not very many of us that have lived it and studied it for many, many years. But really, conjugate started in America from the readings that I've done with Paul Anderson. So Paul Anderson realized he couldn't traditionally squat the exact same way all the time or he'd get beat up. So what he did was he wanted to squat at least a couple of times a week, so he would change the heights and the implements he would use. So he dug different heights of pits in his backyard, and he could do it 1,200 at some pits and only 900 in others, and then sometimes just free weight squat. But he was rotating the first time you ever saw a rotation of style.
Yeah.
By range of motion change. And so that was in the 50s. And then another guy comes along named Bob Hoffman that never really did the same workout twice. And he was more known as a bodybuilder, but he's pretty strong too. So those were the guys that were kind of the innovators of conjugate in America, but they ended up getting lost somehow in the shuffle. And I think a lot of it was because in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the Soviets and Eastern Bloc countries were so much overly dominant to the Americans that we lost so much strength information both before that and during that time because our focus was on aerobics. Because we got told by a couple of doctors, like a couple from the Cooper Institute, that, if you want to lift weights to look better, that's one thing. But if you want to be healthy, then you should be doing cardio. And most of the doctors took that position on most of their clients. And we probably missed in the 60s and 70s and 80s a lot of super good anaerobic athletes because they just weren't taught correctly.
Yeah.
So and then Louis kind of brought the books back into context in the 90s up into the 2000s. And that's what brought conjugate back. But I mean, in reality, I would say at that most educated level, Medvedev was doing that in the 70s. It's just, they were our mortal enemy at that time. So we didn't get to see it until it was retranslated, which would have been in around 92. And that was only in a handful of people's libraries. I went and looked it up because I wanted to get another copy, and I was telling you earlier that Medvedev's copy of one of his particular books was $400
On eBay, yeah.
On a used site because they don't make them anymore. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write my book is I feel a lot of the knowledge that's in it is going to be lost if I don't republish it.
Yeah, which is special, which is important. That's really cool.
Yeah, because a lot of times, and that's where I was upset with Louis in certain ways. So I got his book just to get some ideas, the Book of Methods.
Yeah.
And I read it, and there was some good shit in it, but where were the references?
Yeah, he says some of the names, but it's just also pretty sporadic in the delivery, so it's hard to know which even studies being referenced or whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're almost like, this is kind of iffy and questionable. And I honestly, I don't even know. I mean, he would have never gotten that published with Human Kinetics. But the point is like, I didn't want to write a book like that even though maybe the knowledge was there, I want people to look that stuff up and take their own ideas from it.
Yeah.
Because certain paragraphs that I read from Evdiev are not translated the same way that Louis thinks it's translated. And maybe he's right, maybe I'm wrong, or vice versa. But the point is that when you translate that high scientific training ideals into English from Russian, it's choppy. It's hard to read. And so there could be points missing in it. It could be certain words that we just don't have in our vocabulary that don't match. But certain things that Louis would cite, I would go back and read and be like, that did not say that at all. And that's where it got really interesting. So maybe in certain ways in the book, I'm going to be wrong too. But can I be wrong after 30 years and doing it for so long and then experiment with it with hundreds and hundreds and
with your masters and stuff? I think it's a cool, and I make the argument that everybody is really just a translator. Nobody's really like a writer in that realm. Like, you give your best translation, that's your voice, and but you have a foundation of, again, time, experience, a lifetime of application, then also this master's, multiple 6 years of education and all that stuff. I think it's, again, I think you're a great person to.
The conjugate system, in my opinion, if you're in this for the long haul and you're in this to not get hurt and you're in this to train smart, you need to start learning as much as you can about that system. If your idea is, I'm going to do this for 2 years and quit, or I'm going to let other things in life get in the way, or I want to be good now, it's not the system for you. It's really, you should get the hell out of the sport.
Yeah.
But that's most of the people in the sport, is they have these fast, they think they can be a John Hack or somebody like that in like two years. And in some ways there are. I mean, like Maddox benched 500 the first time he touched a bar, and then within 3 to 4 years he had the world record.
Which is, yeah.
But who's 6'2", 460 pounds, and he's not super fat, and he's probably the most explosive guy upper body I've ever seen. I mean, his starting power off of his chest, the videos do it no justice. If you saw him move 675 raw off of his chest, you would realize really quick that no matter what you do, you're not going to be Maddox.
Yeah.
Because for most people, even if you're highly trained, 675 is going to break your rib cage in half, number one. And number two, you're not going to have any reactive speed to it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So again, you're going to have people like that. And the problem is we look towards the freaks in order to say, oh, I want to be that, instead of the guy that grinded his ass off to break a world record for 20 years, which is probably more along the lines of our genetics.
Yeah.
Right? So conjugate is a long-term thought process, and it's one of those ones that it's a constant learning process. So if you like to learn and you love to train and you don't have a timeline and you're not trying to be better tomorrow, you're going to be better overall doing conjugate over a long period of time and probably at numbers that are way beyond what you thought you were capable of, just like I did. But you're going to have to be willing to put years in. It's not going to be one of those things where, because you can't understand everything right off the rip. And that becomes the hard part with any training, is some of these other training modalities like linear periodization or 5-3-1 Windler, which has some really good ideas. Some of those things are awesome and they might get you stronger faster, but you're going to hit a ceiling limit faster too. So it might make you stronger quicker, but now you're fighting for those extra 2 pounds because you're not training the way you should be training.
Get off the plateau, yeah.
Yeah, you're going to plateau faster. You see a faster spike, but a stronger plateau that's harder to break. And for me, I'd rather just keep clicking it up little by little every year, to the point that I'm at my genetic limit instead of my educational limit. And most people hit their educational limit, they quit.
Yeah.
It's not a physical thing. It's, are you willing to learn more, something that's outside of your wheelbox? So I'll give you a quick example. Like when I hit 35, 36, I first ran into Charles. And Charles goes, you realize if you start eating cleaner and you start doing this, you're going to be stronger than you are now. And I'm thinking, yeah, but I need that body size. And he goes, you can get that body size, but you need to have it in cross-sectional muscle area, not inflammation. So he could see in my face that I was dairy and gluten intolerant. So he pulls my dairy and my gluten out. I drop 30 pounds, right? And at first my mechanics are off. Then he bumps my quality carbs back up with rice, more fats, more nuts, things like that. And within about 8 months, I went from weighing 305 and about 22% body fat, which is still pretty lean for 305. I was 16% body fat, 296. And that's when I broke 2 of the all-time world records raw in the squat.
That's cool. That's cool to see the influence on powerlifting.
And you can see the veins in my legs and my abs were coming in. And my waist was, at that weight, 296, my waist was 38. So I was starting to look like
the real deal.
A psycho.
Yeah.
You know, versus back in the days before that at Louis, just eat. You know, just worry about training.
Yeah, hot stove burns all wood kind of concept.
Hot stove burns all wood. And then Poliquin told me something completely different. But I could have told Poliquin, no, dude, fuck you. You're little, and you're not nearly as strong as me. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Right? Because I could have said that, and I would have been right at that time as far as my mindset. But I said, no, this is something that I haven't really attacked yet, and I'm smart enough to understand it. Let's try it. It's because I already knew I knew training. I already knew I knew reps, sets, volume, rest periods. Those things, the amount that I could get better in those areas was marginal. But the amount that I could get better at recovery and eating correctly and doing all these other things was huge. So once I put that into play, it's like my strength just went, again, another 10% jump in my mid-30s.
Which is awesome.
But it was because I was willing to work on things that were my shortcomings.
Yeah, which is powerful. And we're basically at a time in that capacity. Just real quick, what's a first step? Because I got a bunch of strength coaches that listen. They could take as learning and applying conjugate real quick.
Well, the first thing is you're just going to have to be able to read. I mean, you know, that's the big thing. You know, look at all the YouTube videos that I put out.
Okay.
And that will help tremendously. Go to winningstrength.com, read the manuals. Every manual that I do is a training block, but it also is explaining my mentality behind those blocks, okay? And now we have the new membership site on the website, which is all long projects. So I put a 5-hour video on how to train conjugate.
Let's go.
Just posted that 2-3 days ago. It's $35 a month.
Yeah.
Then I posted all these other seminars of me talking to other people, fixing their problems, talking about training methodologies. And then, you know, all of Louis', and in my opinion, all of Louis' articles in the 90s and the early 2000s, absorb them. Not that they're all right, but they'll start putting you in the right rabbit hole to start digging, just like me. You know, when I first started reading Louis' shit, I'm like, what? He's saying that I got to get faster to get stronger? I never heard anybody say anything like that.
Yeah.
Well, then that led me to Fred Hatfield. And then Fred Hatfield started talking about compensatory acceleration. And then I saw he squatted 1,015 at 242 in 1984.
Good God.
So he was before Louis talking about getting faster to get stronger. And then, so my point is, I would have never knew about Fred Hatfield if Louis wouldn't have told me about speed training first, because then I went down the rabbit hole, and then I saw Fred Hatfield was talking about that 15, 20 years earlier. And I'm like, oh, shit. I was missing a huge component in my training, but I was missing that component at 20 years old, not 50 years old. So once I plugged it back in,
wisdom, yeah,
it's gone. So my point is, you know, try to be around people smarter than you. Be around people that have genetically pushed their limits, that have, and also done it for a long time. I talked about on Dave Tate's podcast, the 3 pillars. You need to find somebody that's willing to be educated. So I'm not saying that they have to have a master's or a PhD. It definitely helps, though. Then find somebody that's reached the top or close to the top of their genetic capacity. Then find somebody, the third one that I think is just as important, be that good for a long time. Because you might be able to be a genetic freak and be good for a year, but you can't be a genetic freak and be good for 10 years.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get broke.
Yeah.
And so find guys with low injuries, high numbers, and could sustain them for a long period of time. Those guys know something.
Yeah, guaranteed.
Right? I mean, they have to know something, because the average person, if they're genetically good at something, they're going to push too hard, too fast, they're going to get broke.
Yeah.
So those are some things that I would say, and I know that puts me in those contexts. You don't have to listen to everything I say, but like there's a lot of people that have done that before me and are doing it now. It's just hard to find because, again, what we sell is sexy as far as the education process, but sexy isn't, in an educational way, isn't a selling point today. So you would find that most people that have under 500,000 subscribers know more than the guys that have 5 million, because they probably started doing shit that just made them more popular versus actually sticking to their guns. And that's what I've really tried to do my whole career, is just stick to my guns. I don't give a shit how successful it makes me, but I'm not leaving behind a lineage of shit. I'm going to put things that I truly believe in down. So one day when I'm dead and gone, somebody can look at all this stuff and go, the motherfucker was on the right track. You know what I mean? Whether it's good now or bad, but you know how artists are. Most of them are famous after they die.
Yeah.
Right. So
I love that. Well, we're out of time, man. I appreciate your time, obviously, and the wisdom. I'll have in the intro, I'll have all your information where everybody can find you. Obviously, dropped the website on us already, but yeah, dude, thank you.
You're no problem, man.
Easy.